I'm Lance Lambert. Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Vehicle Show. We are at the Motoring J Style Car Show in Vallejo, California. This is a collection of several hundred all Japanese cars. There's cars from back in the 50s, there's brand new cars, there's drifters, there's everything you can imagine in the Japanese style of car. So what we're going to do today is what we do every week. You're going to get a chance to see some of these cars, meet some of the owners, and hear some great music. So do what I tell you to do every week. Just kick back, relax, and enjoy the show. People often ask me how I pick what cars I want to promote on the Vintage Vehicle Show. Well, this particular car fit the bill. I'm walking along and it just spoke to me. It jumped out at me and said, do an interview on me. Not literally, of course, but Jeff Torres, your Datsun Fair Lady / 1600 is absolutely gorgeous.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a lot of work.
It's definitely not, I make no claims to having any expertise when it comes to Japanese automobiles, but even to my untrained eye, this has been altered a lot. In 4 sentences, what have you done to it?
Basically, it was a retired racer car, motocross and autocross, not motocross, but autocross racing. And I just kind of kept it as it was. In the late 60s, they raced these cars a lot up in Sears Point, and the local circuits and the national circuits. Brock Racing Enterprises kind of made them famous. And I kind of copied that whole Brock Racing Enterprise look with the stripes on the side and the low profile and whatnot.
A question that's always been a mystery to me is Fair Ladies, though that just seems like such an odd name for a car. How did that come about?
Well, it came about as a result of the Nissan engineers and technicians, and one of the executives who was overseeing part of the process with the Datsun Roadsters. His wife, one of her favorite plays on Broadway was My Fair Lady, and in honor to his wife and making her happy, and because he loved her, I suppose, he named the car the Fair Lady. And to this day, the Fair Lady is still used in Japan. The 350Zs that we have here, the 2007, 2008 in Japan, are actually still called Fair Lady Zs as opposed to the 350Z here.
So their research showed that Fair Lady was going to be a selling point on the car?
I don't know that if it was going to be a selling point. It was more if it was just a traditional situation that kind of carried on down the line. So
they ruled out Pussycat or something like that.
Right, and part of the reason that that the United States cars that were shipped over as part of the marketing program for the Datsuns here in the United States, they came over labeled as 1600s and 2000s. There's a 2000 behind me right here. The reason that they didn't have the Fair Lady logo on there is because during the 60s and the early 70s, when these cars were in production, the United States was going through the muscle car movement. And they didn't believe that by badging a car Fair Lady that it would suit well with the muscle car era that they were going through. So it was a marketing decision to name them 1600 and 2000.
This particular car, the performance on it, it looks like it scoots right along. You know what?
The weight to power ratio, you're right. It's very light. It's like driving a go-kart. I think this car soaking wet's probably about 1,400 pounds. The output is a 1595cc 4-cylinder side draft engine, which is the stock motor that came with the vehicle. Makes it quick and responsive, and as Datsun and Nissan and a lot of the Japanese car companies, the engines have been reliable. This car, I take it routinely from Modesto to Nevada on fun runs we have, and it drives all over the place, and I would take this car anywhere as far as reliability goes. It's a great little car.
It's obvious as I'm going around the show today that there is one person here who is, a legend is the right word, a god is another word. Those of you out there that appreciate race car driving and race history, you recognize Peter Brock standing next to me. Peter, this is pretty exciting.
This is probably one of the most interesting shows that we've ever done, because the whole Japanese car culture didn't even exist when we first started racing these cars. And to see what it's grown into now is absolutely fantastic, Lance.
How long have you been racing Japanese cars?
We started actually with a very little informal group in Southern California in about 1966. And we started racing a little car called a Hino. And that company now only makes trucks. They were bought out by Toyota, who didn't want the competition, so they eliminated the car thing. But the whole Japanese car thing really started with a little company called Hino.
And Datsun has been your pal for a long time?
Yes, we started racing Datsuns in 1968, and it was a rather interesting program because originally I had contracted with Toyota to do their development, and they actually secretly backed out of the deal and gave it to Carroll Shelby, so without telling me. So that was kind of a sneaky deal. I was a little upset on that, I'll tell you. So I went over to Nissan, and all they had was the 2000 Roadster, and they said, oh, this car isn't really capable of winning. I said, I'm going to make it win. Please give it to me. And they refused. So I went back to the controller at Hino in Japan and told him what the situation was, and he says, give me a couple of days. I have a friend at Nissan Motor Corporation that I went to school with. And it turned out he was the chairman of the board, and because of our good relationship with Hino over the years, they sent me 2 cars and enough money to run them, and I showed up and we won the Pacific Coast Division Championship, and from there on we cleaned house.
How'd that go over with all your contemporaries that were driving Mustangs and Camaros and British cars?
Well, it was interesting because all of my friends were all American, and of course my background was a lot of hot rodding. So there was a lot of interest in kind of what we were doing, but they were kind of doing their thing, and we were sort of developing our own little niche at the time because there wasn't very much going on. All the other sedans and foreign cars, of course, were out of Europe, so the Japanese thing was always not really too well understood. And it wasn't until we went to the Times Mirror Grand Prix in '67, and I won that opening event, call it the Mission Bell 100. I built a big stroker motor for that little 1300. I think we were running about a 2100 motor at it, and it was kind of run what you brung thing, and we won the race, and it was major news in Japan because it said, you know, Japanese car wins Riverside Grand Prix, and that really kicked it off.
I asked Peter off camera if he was going to participate in some of the drifting that was going on here today. You responded with a no questions asked, no.
Well, drifting's really an interesting offshoot, and it has more to do with turbocharging and getting your power that way. And I've always been an American big V8 guy, so as you can see from my car over here, we can go over and take a look at it. My little 510's running a ZZ3. 350 cubic inch Chevy in it, 5-speed gearbox and stuff. So it could drift, but I'm really more of a road racer.
Well, let me check the audience. Everybody out there that wants to see his 510 with a Chev V8 in it, raise your hand.
All right. Oh, hey, that's a big crowd. That's excellent.
All right, let's go take a look.
Let's take a look at that, Lance.
Peter, my knees are knocking a little bit looking at this combination. Tell me about what you have.
Well, this has been a car that I've always wanted to build since we were racing the 510s. With my old hot rod background, I've always wanted to put a big V8 in one of these babies. And I started out with one of our tow trucks. I put a 315 aluminum Buick in, and I realized after all the work of putting this little aluminum Buick in my Volkswagen,
you could have had a V8.
I could have had a real V8. So when we started doing this project, this has been very slow. It's almost 10 years, I think, I've been working on this thing a little at a time. But I've had help from a lot of good fabricators that have come in because I closed my own shop down, so I've kind of farmed it out with a different bunch of guys, and we slowly put this thing together, and it's just about ready to fire it up. I hope to have it running here at the show, but it's a 350 cubic inch ZZ3 crate motor. These were originally designed for the Craftsman trucks, and they had a high riser 4-barrel on them, but of course you could see that wouldn't have fit underneath the cowl, so we put the fuel injection off a Corvette in it, which will give it probably another 50 horsepower. So it'll probably run a little over 500 horsepower.
What's the weight?
And I think it's going to be just under 2,100 pounds. So moving the engine back and everything, the weight should be about 50-50 balance on it. So it's going to be just about like driving a Cobra, except it'll have a roof on it.
There's probably a viewer or two out there that's sitting there thinking, hey, these old Japanese cars really are cool, and look what that guy did to that car. Maybe I should do it too. What's the advice you would give them?
Probably the best buy you can buy in Japanese cars. They're getting a little late now. The price on finding a clean one of these things now is just going out of sight. When I originally bought this tub here, I think it was about $650. Now it's probably around 6,000 to 8,000 for a bare tub, and a complete cherry car is going for around 15. So the prices are just climbing, and it's partly the rarity of the cars because most of them were so good they just ran them right into the ground, hundreds of thousands of miles. So it's hard to find a nice one.
Every large car show that you go to, you realize there's somebody there that's a big deal within the hobby, a big deal for all the people that are at the car show. Well, Troy Sumitomo, you are the man.
Oh, thank you, Lance. Well, I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
To the crowd that watches the show normally, this is the Chip Foose or the Boyd Coddington of this segment of the hobby. I was watching the video. I'm gonna, I'm not gonna kid you. I was not that up on what goes on in this side of the car hobby, and once I started looking, you're gigantic.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, we've been very fortunate. I do have, like you mentioned, Chip Foose. I too have a design background like he does, and I chose to really focus my efforts on the import industry, and we've been really fortunate that a company like Toyota, Scion, has really grasped onto us, and as you can see here, asked us to do some really pretty unique things with their vehicles.
The passion for foreign cars, for Asian cars, compared to the passion for 60s, 50s American cars, seems to be just as strong, one and the other.
Right. I mean, I think everybody, they latch on to what they really like, whether it's an old school, like you said, nostalgic American cars, or whether it's the imports. I mean, I think we all look for that one thing, that the passion, that whatever it is. I mean, to me, I like to stay pure too, with like you would, let's say, if you're an old Ford or Chevy guy. I mean, you kind of stick to that brand that you grew up with, and Toyotas. I mean, I've owned Toyota since I was day one. My first car was a Toyota, so yeah. I mean, I find myself, latching onto it and being pretty loyal to it, like you would like an old school American car.
We're surrounded on two sides by 5-axis creations. What do we have right here?
Okay, well, the two cars here, actually the one behind me is the first car that we did for Scion. When Scion came to market back in I think it was like 94, the XB, everyone remembers that car because it was the weirdest looking thing. It actually came straight out of Japan, but it was a real boxy, quirky little car, and the car behind us was our first attempt at customizing a Scion, and because Scion's all about customization and personalization, this was kind of the 5-axis take on it, and the car behind you is our XA Speedster, which was the third car that we did for Scion, and again, we just pushed the limits of customization with these, and both these cars are really focused at the youth market, with DJs and music behind me, and then gaming and all and stuff like that behind you. I mean, that was really our focus. What does the Scion market really want? What do they grasp onto? And we felt these were kind of like our best shots at that.
I write for a few newspapers, and I had the pleasure of covering a Scion event in Seattle in the recent past. There were, hundreds of Scions there, and what surprised me, again, it's the age thing, was that there were so many people that bought these cars that weren't under the age of 30. There were lots of 50s and 60s, and there was even a guy in his 70s there who made his living as a clown. The guy out of Vegas, yeah.
I mean, Lance, that's one thing you touched upon. The Scion market, it is really geared towards a youth market. But as you said, I mean, how many other car shows do you go to where there's I call it a cult following, but it literally is. I mean, Scion, the owners, I mean, they're real passionate. They drive in large crowds to these events. I mean, they just recently had this big event up in Nevada. I mean, where in the middle of the desert, they had a whole bunch of people show up. I mean, it's really interesting, in this day and age, to have a brand come out like this, where there's such a huge following, like you said, from young people to older people. I mean, I know another guy that runs with one of the car clubs in the Los Angeles area, and he's probably in his 60s or 70s. And you know what? I mean, it just goes to show if there's enthusiasm or passion behind something, it really doesn't matter what age you are.
Well, Troy, I think you're a part of the soon-to-be the history of this hobby, and you are the future of this hobby.
I appreciate that.
All right, thanks for being on the Vintage Vehicle Show.
Thank you very much, Lance. It was a pleasure.
How could you attend an all-Japanese car show and not take a close look at a 240Z Datsun? This is a beautiful car. Jumped out at me. Frank Burkeen, this is a fine example.
Thank you, Lance. We love this car a lot, my wife and I.
What year is it?
It's a 1972 Datsun. Production at this point had reached in the range of about 42,000, so this one's serial number is around that number, and they really had the formula down on this one. This is a great car.
The 240s are what, the grandpa of the, I suppose you could say the fair ladies were or something, but as far as something that looked saleable in the country of America with a real sports car look that came from Japan. Do you think this maybe holds that title?
So, yeah, it's, one of the reasons I really love the car is at the time when the 240 came out, a lot of the choices in the States were really, really limited performance and reliability. There were a lot of the British cars, not to be negative on British cars, but they did have kind of a reputation for not being reliable. And the Z came out and it was big enough for an American and it ran all the time and it was strong. It would keep up with the Porsches of the day. So it was a winner from the get-go. And Katayama-san, the guy who really insisted on marketing this car in the U.S. the way he did a fantastic job with the car.
I think they have more of a European look than a Japanese look.
A little bit, yeah, they did. There's accusations of where the design came from, and that's part of Datsun legacy.
Tell us what you've done to it.
So this one actually has a 3-liter Rebello motor. It's fuel injected. It has a 5-speed. It has limited slip out of a newer Z. Coilover suspension with camber plates front and rear. This one is really set up to be a track machine. It's much too pretty to actually take on the track, though. So it ends up sitting in my garage, and I bring it to shows like this.
I didn't see it over in the drifting competition today.
No, I don't usually drift this one.
You mentioned Rebello. I'm learning today that that's the engine to have.
Yeah, Dave Rebello's been building race engines for a long time, and he did a great job. This is a 3-liter special from him, done on the L6 platform, so it's a stock engine. It does a great job of balancing and blueprinting and makes very reliable motors that go a couple 100,000 miles on the street. So everybody loves Dave Rebello motors.
The specifics on this, you mentioned a little bit about the motor. What else has been done to the car?
Sport interior. It has frame reinforcements that make it a stiffer car. It's been really kind of modernized, and then of course the fuel injection, the standalone fuel injection that's on it, really take it into a modern performance realm where it knows what season it is, it knows what the temperature is, it knows the right fuel for the conditions, and it runs very efficiently. It gives good mileage and will pass a smog exam.
So is it aware, like I am, that it's way too cold here today?
Wait, there are better days for car shows. Well, this was aware when it was wet. It doesn't like being wet.
Well, I don't like being wet and I don't like being cold, so I'm going to bring this to a close. But thank you very much, Frank, for your time, and this is a beautiful car.
Thank you very much.
One of the stereotypes within this segment of the car hobby is that it's all 25-year-old guys driving these Japanese cars. Well, we have proved that that is not the case, and I found a gentleman here that's one of my contemporaries, and you own a couple of the most outstanding cars here. Martin Swig, you have the from one end of the spectrum to the other, I think, here. You have a yellow, what is it, a 68 Corona?
That is. A nice
Tell us about it.
Well, it's just a nice 25,000-mile preserved original that's kind of hard to find. When I saw that for sale, I didn't waste much time getting it bought.
Going from bone stock on this one to off the I mean, this is so cool. Whatever this is, it is so cool. I would love to show up at Bob's Big Boy or the Triple X or someplace driving this car. Tell us about this one.
Well, this car I first saw about 3 years ago in the hands of the man who built it in Southern California. And it, although the body shape, it owes a lot to the Toyota Corona. It's a total race car underneath, but it's street legal, powered with a stock V8 Lexus engine. Got a 4-speed automatic, and just a nice roadworthy, very fast car. But it was for sale in Southern California for about 2 years, and nobody wanted it. It doesn't fit anyone's perception of what a hot rod should be, which should be kind of old Ford based and new Ford or Chevy powered. Well, this didn't fit any categories, which made it kind of appealing to me, and I just thought I couldn't afford to leave it there.
When you take this out on the streets, what kind of reaction are you getting from people?
Well, sort of incredulous, I guess, is the best word, because it's just a nice tractable car to drive. It's really fast on the highway. I mean, it'll run probably 140 and feels good, but it's a car that you've never seen anything like it before, so you don't know quite how to react to it.
Well, thank you very much. Wow, I want to borrow this sometime and drive it into Bob's Big Boy. Can we arrange that?
Are you man enough?
I'm man enough. Thank you, Martin.
Thanks so much.
Fine gentleman standing next to me, Mr. David Swig, is the producer, director, whatever, of the Motor and J Style Car Show. Nice job.
Thank you very much. We're very pleased with it. This is year 2. We finally have an idea what we're doing here, and I think we've got a pretty good show to show for it.
How did this come about?
I grew up around the European classic car scene, going to the traditional events like the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance and the Monterey Historics, things like that. But when I came of driving age, what I could afford were the vintage Japanese cars, rear-wheel drive, vintage Datsuns and Toyotas and stuff like that. And what I saw was that there was a huge group of enthusiasts interested in these cars, but no kind of proper venues to get all of us together. The Japanese car scene has traditionally been segregated by brand. The Datsun guys, the Toyota guys, the Mazda guys all have their own little cliques, and we wanted to break down some of that and have a forum for everybody, and I think that's what we've done here.
So like in the rough crowd that I hang out with, some of the Ford guys say bad things about some of the Chevy guys. It was the same thing with the Datsun and Toyota people?
You know, it's not so much like that. I think a big part of it is that with these enthusiasts, I kind of call them the Internet Car Club generation. A lot of these guys have a particular website or forum that they frequent, and those are broken down by model and or by brand. And I think that has fostered affiliations that are, you know, it's the Nissan 350Z guys hang out together and the Acura NSX guys. So it's not so much a rivalry, I would say, but that's just how it's played out with the internet being the driving force behind a lot of these enthusiasts.
If it's a rivalry, it's probably a pretty friendly one.
I would say so. You know, there's a little Datsun Toyota rivalry going on maybe, but I think that the guys here, the Datsun guys, are enjoying seeing what the Toyota guys have brought out and vice versa.
Have you seen any changes in this segment of the hobby since the show last year, this being your second year between last year and this year? Any changes?
Yeah, well, certainly. You know, Lance, as far as the market goes for these cars, all of a sudden people are getting nostalgic about Japanese cars from the 60s, 70s, and early 80s. It's just a product of the fact that the people who grew up in my generation, I was born in '84, this is what we remember driving around on the streets, and we're getting to the age where this is what we get nostalgic about. And there's a corresponding rise in values with these cars and more of an interest in preserving them and restoring them. So I'd say that's the trend, that's the way it's going, and it's going to continue to do so. It's only going up from here.
All right. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Lance.
Great show. We have had a great time here in Vallejo, California at the Motor and J Style Car Show. A lot of fun. And the drifting was pretty exciting too. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again next time.